Ladies and gentlemen, NPR put out a story about the inequality in COVID 19. You would think since they're making all these claims that we get it the worst, where's the federal funding for the Black community? How come that's not part of your stimulus? You know, it's amazing how they want to tell you these things, but but they fall very short on doing something about it. You notice that? They want to give you all the lip service about it. But when it comes down to putting funding behind the Black community to deal with these things, oh, everybody goes silent now. So that tells me you're really not concerned. You're just taking pure joy and running around and saying it. But don't jump around too quickly, because when I look at the obituary, I see more elderly white people than anyone else. And I'm not the only one that's been looking at the obituary. Many of my subscribers are looking, and their findings are exactly like mine. See, we don't want your percentages. We don't want your per capita. If you're going to tell us we are the ones getting it the most, show us the raw numbers. We've been asking for the raw numbers since y'all been babbling about this in the media. Why are you taking so long to provide these numbers? What the hell is up with that? See, this is why we can't believe these people. Number two, we have always been undercounted in America since there was a U.S. census. We have always been undercounted, and the high IQ, they have always been overcounted in America. That being said, you can't go by percentages or per capita if you know damn well you've been undercounting us. The U.S. Census themselves have admitted that. So that being the case, then there's no way you can use percentages or per capita. So I'm going to go ahead and play this audio from NPR.
Just 3 months ago, towards the end of February, safe to say most of America was not that concerned about the coronavirus. Today, deaths in the U.S. from COVID-19 are fast closing in on 100,000, which leads us to the question, who in America is dying in this pandemic? Increasingly, we're learning that the hardest hit communities are also the poorest, the most crowded. They are communities of color where rates of chronic disease run high.
Well, it is unfortunately not that surprising.
That is Jarvis Chen, a social epidemiologist at Harvard. He and his colleagues have been combing through data, looking closely at confirmed cases and what are called excess deaths. Those are deaths beyond what is expected in a normal year. In Massachusetts, they found excess deaths have surged in the very communities that are already struggling.
These are communities in which people may be working, quote unquote, essential jobs where they're unable to practice physical distancing. These are communities where people are living in crowded conditions so that if one person in a household gets infected, it's very difficult for them to isolate and protect the other people in their households. We know there have been widespread shortages of personal protective equipment, and so essential workers don't have access to them. These are also communities in which people may not be getting access to testing or to care, and so that increases their risk of dying if they do get infected. So it really is compounding of inequality on top of inequality.
Just to put this in human terms, I was struck by a line in the Boston Globe, which I know your Harvard team worked with in terms of trying to comb through and make sense of this data. And they write that in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where there's a high Latino population, a funeral home saw its workload double last month. Or that in Medford, which is a city with pockets of diversity and poverty, that burial permits doubled. You're looking at the data that is behind that.
Yes, we're trying to look at the data, but there's also a human perspective, so that when I look at the data and I see the number of excess deaths creeping up, 100, 200, 300 over the course of April, that's per week, each of those has implications for people's families, their communities, their social networks. So it's important to remember that excess deaths is reflecting real loss of human life.
Was there anything you spotted in the data that surprised you?
So one of the things that we've been working with recently is trying to get a handle on when the surge in excess mortality actually started. It's very clear for April that there are very large increases in excess mortality, but we're seeing some hints in the data that that surge in mortality might have started earlier in the less disadvantaged areas. So what we think is happening in those more affluent areas is those reflect the introduction of coronavirus into communities by more affluent people who were traveling in the early part of 2020. And then what happened is that it spread to other communities, and that's where we see the real surge, sort of like when you light a match and throw it into a bunch of tinder, that it really takes off. But the earlier phase does seem to be consistent with the idea that it's being introduced by people who have the economic means to travel before it really takes off in the communities that are more disadvantaged.
Huh. Why is it important to know now who is dying?
So it's important that we try to find this out as quickly as possible in real time, because we're probably going to see more waves as we go through this next year. And so knowing what we did and what we did wrong the first time around will help us understand better how to direct the resources. So for example, creating resources for people in communities to be able to isolate, so housing or temporary housing for people who test positive so that they can protect their families is really important. Knowing where to direct PPE as it becomes more available, so that not just the essential workers in hospitals, but also essential workers in things like public transportation or grocery store workers, those populations can get the PPE that they need, and also directing testing to communities who need it the most. Those things could be really important.
That is Jarvis Chen. He's a social epidemiologist at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen,
Just a few months ago, Army recruiters.
Sorry about that. You know, one thing I noticed that's very consistent in all these interviews is, number one, where are the Black scientists and doctors to research this? Why are all of these researchers, when it comes down to the Black community, having the most? You notice the faces don't look like ours, but we're expected to believe this information, which I don't. All right. And number two, most of your essential workers, a lot of your essential workers are Black. But that is something they conveniently leave out, you know? So again, of all these researchers and doctors and everybody in the media, why are you not trying to get funding for the Black community since we get it the most? Okay, where are the politicians? Where are the politicians? You know, the Black community have been very loyal when it comes down to politics, especially with the Democratic Party. Where are the politicians in the Democratic Party that is going to see to it that the Black community gets funding because of COVID-19 and us allegedly getting it the most? You know, until I hear those things, I know the only reason why you're bringing it up is you have a sick fascination with it. But as far as doing something about it, you're not interested in that. You're not interested. And again, where are the raw numbers? We've been asking for raw numbers now, going on 2 months. Where are the raw numbers? So as long as you keep babbling about what we got the most and you don't show any data, I will never believe you. Just understand that. I will never believe you. And ladies and gentlemen, again, we got Black doctors and scientists. How come they're never involved in any of the data that comes out? You never see one. You never see one interviewing. You never see none. And that is a problem in itself. But y'all, please tell me what you think. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.